storm arrived 3 hours before dawn. Alara Voss heard it coming before she felt it, a low-pressure change in the air of her small room, the kind of atmospheric shift she had learned to read the way other people read clocks. She lay still on her narrow bed and listened to the wind build against the north face of the boreal stronghold, gaining weight and intention with each pass until the stone walls themselves seemed to lean inward slightly against the force of it. She had lived inside these walls for 23 years. She knew every sound they made. She rose before her alarm, dressed in the dark by habit, and pulled on her boots with the efficient movements of someone who had long ago made peace with early mornings. The single window of her room looked out over the northern courtyard, and in the gray pre-dawn light, she could see the snow coming sideways now, dense and purposeful, the kind of storm that did not announce itself so much as simply arrive and begin its work. She took her key ring from the wardrobe hook. 14 keys, each one labeled in her own careful handwriting. She had been the sole keeper of the Hall of Relics for 4 years since the position had passed to her after the death of archivist Tobias Voss. Her father, in every way that mattered, though not in blood, a distinction the clan had never let her forget. She did not think about that distinction this morning. She thought about the storm and the artifacts, and whether the humidity seals on the Third Era goblet cases needed checking before the temperature dropped further. This was how she survived, by thinking about what was directly in front of her. The corridors of the stronghold were empty at this hour. Alara moved through them with the economy of motion she had developed over 2 decades of navigating spaces where she was tolerated, rather than welcomed close to the wall. Footsteps, quiet face arranged in the expression of someone engaged in necessary work and nothing more. She was good at necessary work. She was, in fact, exceptional at it, though no one in the Boreal clan had ever used that word in connection with her. She had other words for herself assembled privately over years of listening to what people said when they thought she was not paying attention. Useful, unobtrusive, surprisingly competent for a human. The last phrase had come from Alpha Brecken Garrick himself, delivered to a visiting dignitary 4 years ago in the corridor outside the relic hall. He had not known she was on the other side of the storage cabinet, inventorying the ceremonial blade collection. She had continued without making a sound, and she had filed the phrase away in the mental catalog she kept of things people revealed when they stopped accounting for her presence. Surprisingly competent for a human. She had decided on reflection that she could work with that. The Hall of Relics occupied the northeast corner of the stronghold's ground level, a long stone room with a vaulted ceiling and narrow windows set high in the walls that let in light without letting in the weather. Alara unlocked the main door, entered, and stood for a moment in the familiar silence, while her eyes adjusted to the dim. The artifacts rested in their places. She checked them the way she checked everything, systematically left to right, near to far, noting condition, position, any deviation from the last recorded state. The ceremonial goblets from the Third Era, the treaty scrolls in their sealed glass casings, the woven battle banners from the War of the Pale Moon, the bone-handled blade collection, the Founding Era Council seals, all present, all undisturbed. And then at the center of the hall, on its raised dais of black stone, the Ice Wolf of the North. She always saved it for last, not from superstition or not entirely. More because standing in front of it required a quality of attention she preferred to give completely without the distraction of unfinished inventory work at her back. The wolf stood nearly as tall as she was. Carved, if carved was even the right word, from a single block of glacier ice so ancient that the scholars who had visited over the years had eventually stopped trying to date it and simply recorded it as predating all known clan founding records. Its body was caught mid-stride, head slightly lowered, ears forward, pale eyes open and fixed on the middle distance, with the absolute authority of something that had been watching the world for a very long time and had formed certain conclusions about it. It never melted. This was the fact that visitors found most difficult to accept. Summer temperatures inside the hall reached 68 degrees. The great hearth fires burned through ceremonial nights. During the border conflicts 3 years ago, war torches had been lit in every quarter of the stronghold for 6 consecutive days, and the heat had been intense enough that condensation wept down the stone walls. The wolf had remained exactly as it always was, cold and unchanged and present, as though the physical laws governing everything else in the world had considered the wolf and decided to make an exception. The scholars called it an anomaly. The clan elders called it sacred. The pack members called it untouchable, because it was any wolf who pressed a palm against the glacier surface came away with cold burns, the kind that left skin pale and numb for days, that traveled up through the hand and into the wrist with a deliberate, penetrating cold that felt less like accident and more like refusal. Alara had watched Alpha Brecken Garrick attempt to touch it once during an official relic assessment when she was 12 years old. He had pressed his palm flat against the wolf's flank and made a sound she had never heard from an alpha before. A sharp inhalation, a controlled hiss of genuine pain. He had withdrawn his hand with an expression that moved quickly through surprise and settled into something harder before anyone else in the room could fully register what they had seen. He had not tried again. Alara touched the wolf every morning. She had been doing it since she was 5 years old, when she had wandered into the hall alone for the first time before anyone had thought to explain that she was not supposed to be there. She remembered reaching out with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of things larger than herself, pressing both small palms flat against the glacier surface and feeling nothing but a pleasant coolness. Not threatening, not burning, simply present. The way a stone feels in autumn after the heat of the day has passed and the evening air has begun its work. She had not understood at 5 that this was unusual. By the time she understood, it had become routine, and she had learned with the wisdom of a child who survives by being consistently overlooked that the safest secrets are the ones you simply never mention. So she touched the wolf every morning. She pressed her hand flat against its flank, felt the familiar deep cold move up through her palm and into her wrist like a greeting, and stood there for a moment in the quiet hall before the rest of the stronghold woke and filled with noise and hierarchy and all the complicated business of being a clan of wolves who had never quite decided what to do with the human in their midst. This particular morning, she pressed her palm against the wolf's flank at the usual hour. The cold moved through her in its familiar way, and then something else happened. She felt it at the moment of contact, a vibration beneath the surface of the ice she had never encountered before. Subtle as a heartbeat, but unmistakably present. A pulse that moved through the glacier body of the carved wolf and into her hand and up her arm, and settled somewhere in the center of her chest with a warmth that had no business existing inside something made of ancient ice. Elara went very still. She stood with her palm flat against the wolf's flank and breathed slowly and waited to see if the sensation would pass. It did not pass. It deepened. And then so gradually she thought it. At first she was imagining it. The wolf's pale carved eyes began to glow. It was not a dramatic light. It was subtle and low and cold blue, the color of bioluminescence trapped inside deep ice. The particular quality of light that exists in the minutes before dawn when the whole landscape is covered in snow and the sky has not yet decided to become morning. The light moved through the body of the wolf, from the eyes downward, through the carved chest, and into the base of the dais, and pooled there. And in that pooled light, letters began to form, not carved, not etched, emerging from within the ice, as though they had always been there waiting for the right moment to become visible. She had to crouch to read them. The language was old, older than the common tongue used across the northern clans, older than the founding era documents in her care. But she had spent 2 decades in this hall, and she had read everything in it, including the language primers buried in the scholarly archives that no one else had thought worth the effort of translating. She moved her lips slightly the way she always did when working through difficult syntax. And when she had parsed the inscription completely, she sat back on her heels and understood that what she was looking at was not decoration. She read it 3 times. The 3rd time she sat down on the cold stone floor and pressed her back against the dais and stared at the ceiling and concentrated on breathing normally. The inscription said, "She who is born of 2 worlds and claimed by neither shall be the hand that wakes the guardian. The guardian chooses its queen before the king knows her name. Blood of the lost line, ice in her veins, fire in her silence. The bond was written before the first alpha drew breath. What the glacier remembers, no crown can undo." She read the last line again. What the glacier remembers, no crown can undo. She was still sitting on the floor working through the implications of that sentence when she became aware of something else. A smell. Faint, barely there, carried under the door on the cold air, iron and cold mud, and something that had no business being this close to the inner walls of the stronghold. She rose, crossed to the main door, and opened it. The wolf was outside the north entrance, not a carved one, a real one, or what had been a real one. It lay at the base of the steps, leading up from the lower courtyard, half buried in the snow that had accumulated during the storm. It had been dead for somewhere between 2 and 4 hours based on the temperature of the body and the degree of ice crystallization at the wound margins. Elara knew this because she had read the field medicine texts in the archival collection, and she had the kind of mind that retained information whether she intended to use it or not. The wolf was not a member of the Boreal clan. She was certain of this before she had even crouched down beside it. The pack markings were wrong. The clan had a specific pattern of color distribution in the guard hairs that she had cataloged years ago out of the same quiet thoroughness that had led her to map the cave system beneath the stronghold and learn 6 dead languages from texts that had been sitting unread in storage for decades. This wolf was from elsewhere. From farther north, she thought, based on the coat density, from a clan that ranged the higher elevations above the tree line. She studied the wound. She studied the tracks in the snow, faint but not entirely erased. She noted the direction from which the wolf had come, not from the gates, not from any recognized approach route, but from the section of the eastern wall where the rock face met the older stonework, the section that the security rotation reached last on the midnight circuit. She noted all of this with the careful, systematic attention she gave to everything. Then she went to the guard station at the eastern corridor and reported what she had found in the exact words required by protocol. Then she returned to the Hall of Relics and resumed her work. The inscription had faded. The glow was gone. The surface of the dais looked exactly as it always did, smooth and undifferentiated and ancient. She pressed her palm against the wolf's flank one more time. The cold moved through her, steady, patient, present. She took her hand away, collected her cleaning supplies, and began the morning work. She had perhaps 6 hours before the Alpha King arrived. His name was Calder Draven, and she had been hearing about him for years. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories was the kind of figure discussed in the spaces between other conversations mentioned in passing as a reference point, a standard. He had consolidated his position 5 years ago, following a period of serious internal conflict among the Northern Alliance clans. And he had done it not through the overwhelming physical dominance that usually characterized such consolidations, but through strategic precision and a reputation for following through on exactly what he said he would do and nothing more. People respected this. People also found it faintly unsettling, which was Alara suspected exactly the effect he intended. She watched his arrival from the upper gallery of the main hall. Technically, this was not a position she was supposed to occupy during official arrivals. But no one had ever explicitly forbidden her from being there because no one had ever thought to anticipate that she would be interested enough to make the trip. This was, she had found, one of the reliable advantages of consistent underestimation. He arrived at exactly midday. Most dignitaries used arrival timing as performance early, to signal eagerness late, to demonstrate that their schedule mattered more than anyone else's. Calder Draven arrived at the precise appointed hour because he was a man who had nothing to prove with his timing. The statement was its own kind of power. He came through the great doors with 4 guards flanking him, an elder Corvin, gray-haired, unreadable. The kind of man whose face had been expressing controlled neutrality for so long it had become an skin arm. It had become his natural expression at his right shoulder. He was taller than she had expected. What she had not expected was the quality of the way he moved. She had seen alpha wolves move with power before the aggressive physical assertion of dominant males, the deliberate occupation of space as territorial statement. Brecken Garrick moved that way. Calder Draven moved differently. He moved with economy taking up exactly as much space as required, and no more every motion precise and intentional without the broadcast quality of someone performing their own authority. The presence he carried was not performed. It simply existed the way the wolf's cold existed as a property of the thing itself, rather than something projected outward for effect. She recognized it because she had spent 2 decades developing the same quality by necessity. She had built it as a survival strategy. She suspected watching him cross the great hall below her that he had built it as something else entirely. Isolde Garrick met him at the base of the main staircase with the practiced grace of someone who had been preparing for this moment for considerably longer than the official negotiations suggested. Dark golden hair arranged with precise northern elegance. Amber eyes that caught the torchlight in a way that seemed almost calculated and probably was. She wore white, a deliberate contrast against the gray stone of the stronghold. Alara had known Isolde her entire life. She had learned early that Isolde was one of the most deliberate people she had ever observed, a woman who noticed where other people were vulnerable and filed that information away with the patient thoroughness of a wolf learning the habits of its territory before moving. She watched Isolde take Calder Draven's hand with the composed warmth of a woman executing a long-prepared plan, and she thought, he has absolutely no idea what he has walked into. The reception moved through its expected shapes. Alara navigated the edges of it with the ease of long practice, a tray of ceremonial wine cups, the expression of polite invisibility that had served her well for 2 decades. She listened. This was her primary skill in social situations that were not hers to participate in. She had learned over the years that people talked most freely in the vicinity of someone they had already categorized as insignificant. In the first hour, she learned 3 things worth keeping. The binding ceremony was scheduled for 3 days hence. Elder Corvin had reservations about something. She could not hear the specific content, but she could read the tension in the line of his jaw and the careful neutrality of his voice when he spoke to the pack members flanking him. And Calder Draven had not smiled once since his arrival. He was processing the reception, the way she processed rooms with focused cataloging attention, registering, assessing, setting aside. She was reaching across a side table to collect an empty cup when she heard Isolde's voice behind her, pitched low with the quality it acquired when she was encountering an obstacle. "The Relics Hall is not part of the approved tour," Isolde was saying. A voice she did not recognize replied with careful deference. The Alpha King expressed specific interest in the historical collection. "It is by all accounts significant." "It is a working archive," Isolde said, smooth and firm. "Many items require specialist handling, perhaps after the ceremony." A pause. "Of course, I will inform the Alpha King." "It is not a restriction," Isolde added, the warmth in her voice precisely calibrated. "Simply a practicality." Alara set the cup on her tray and moved away at her normal pace. She was thinking about the inscription in the ice. She was thinking about Isolde declining access to the one room in the stronghold that contained the wolf. She was thinking about the damp footprint she had noticed 3 days ago near the dais and had attributed without examining the attribution carefully to a plumbing issue in the east corridor. Isolde did not act without reason. Isolde's reasons were never simple and never accidental. She deposited her tray in the service corridor and walked back to the Hall of Relics alone. The inscription was not visible. The Dara surface was smooth and cold and unchanged. She pressed her palm against the wolf's flank. The familiar cold moved through her, steady, patient, waiting. She was in her room that evening, sitting at her desk with Tobias's sealed document case on the surface in front of her, the one she had not opened in 4 years. The one she had moved from shelf to desk and back to shelf too many times to count when someone knocked. She opened the door to find Elder Corbin standing in the corridor. He was older than he looked at a distance. Up close, she could see the full weight of his years in the lines around his eyes and the careful economy of his stillness. He held his hands folded in front of him in the manner of someone who had made a decision and was executing it without ceremony. "May I come in?" he said. It was phrased as a question. It was not entirely a question. She stepped back from the door. He entered, looked around the small room with one quick, comprehensive pass. The pressed flowers in their frame, the winter sketch, the shelf of books, the sealed document, case on the desk, and then turned to face her with eyes she now saw were old gold, the color of late autumn light. "You are Alara Voss," he said, "adopted daughter of archivist Tobias Voss, deceased, human by all official clan records." "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "The Alpha King would like to see the Hall of Relics tonight," he said, "without an official escort." She held his gaze with the steady calm that was her default setting and said nothing. "Isolde Garrick has restricted access," Corvin continued in a tone that made clear he was treating this as information rather than obstacle. "However, the Hall of Relics falls under the administrative purview of the archival household staff, specifically of the senior keeper of relics." He paused. "Which is, I understand, a position currently held by you." "I am the only keeper," she said. "It is not a prestigious position." "No," Corvin agreed, "but it is a position with keys." He said it without particular emphasis. He did not need to. He pushed a second leather document folder across the desk toward her, old and worn, the kind that had been handled frequently over a very long period of time. "There is a second set of these documents," he said. "I prepared 2 copies 30 years ago. Calder has the other. I thought it was time both of you had them." He paused. "Read your father's sealed papers tonight, Alara, then you will understand what I mean." She looked at the folder, then at the sealed document case. "An hour after the second watch bell," she said finally. Corvin nodded once. He moved toward the door, paused with one hand on the frame, and looked back at her with an expression she could not fully categorize. "The Alpha King is not what people expect him to be," he said. It was not advice, it was not a warning. It was simply something he had chosen to say. Then he was gone. Alara sat back down at her desk. She looked at the sealed document case. She looked at it for a long time. Then she broke the wax seal. The sealed package contained 14 sheets of paper covered in Tobias Voss's careful, close handwriting. And one other thing, she read for 2 hours. When she was done, she sat very still for a long time and looked at the second item, a piece of material folded inside the last page. Smooth, faintly blue, cold to the touch even after all the years it had spent sealed away. She pressed it between her palms. It warmed slightly at her touch. Not melting, simply becoming willing to be held. The wax seal she had never been able to identify, she recognized it now. She had seen its twin tonight in a founding-era document she had been cross-referencing. The seal of the Thorn bloodline, the Glacier Keepers, the family recorded in founding law text as the original guardians of the Ice Wolf before the Boreal clan had taken this stronghold 3 generations ago. A family the historical record described as having been absorbed into the general population during the transition or in some cases eliminated. Apparently not entirely. Her real name was written on the last page of the notes in her father's handwriting. He had written it with a care she could feel through the letters, the deliberate weight of each stroke, the slight forward lean of the script that only appeared when he was writing something that mattered to him. As though he had known this would be the last thing she learned about herself and had wanted it to feel like a gift rather than a verdict. Alara Thorn, the lost daughter of the Thorn line, the last Glacier Keeper. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about 2 decades of touching the wolf every morning and feeling a coolness that was pleasant rather than burning a greeting, rather than a warning. She thought about 10 years of mapping the cave system beneath the stronghold, following passages that she had always thought she was discovering and understanding now that she had been remembering. She thought about the inscription, blood of the lost line ice in her veins, and the dead wolf at the eastern steps that morning, sent by someone who had known to look here before anyone else did. She thought about Isolde, who had known for 3 months, who had been managing the information carefully, keeping it contained, preventing it from reaching the one person whose arrival might give it consequence. She thought about the 5 Alpha Council of the Northern Territory, who controlled the trade routes through the Rocky Mountain passes, and had been doing so under terms that, if the founding covenant still held legal weight, were not theirs to control. She pressed the material between her palms again and felt it respond, felt it recognize the specific cold in her hands that it had been waiting to recognize. Then she put on her boots, took her keyring, and went to the Hall of Relics to wait. The storm outside had settled into the steady, purposeful work of a long winter night. The stronghold was quiet around her, and at the center of the hall, on its raised dais of black stone, the Ice Wolf of the North stood in the dark and waited with the patience of something that had always known that eventually the right person would come through the door. He arrived without sound, This was the first thing she noticed, not his presence but the absence of announcement that preceded it. Most people who entered rooms made themselves known before they were seen. Footsteps that slowed at the threshold, a hand on the doorframe, the particular breath of someone preparing to enter a space that was not theirs. Calder Draven opened the door and was simply there. She had been standing near the central dais with her back to the entrance, her palm resting against the wolf's flank. She felt a change in the room before she heard anything, a shift in the air pressure that she recognized from years of proximity to powerful wolves as the signal that the top of a hierarchy had entered a space. She had felt it with Brecken Garrick. She had never felt it this cleanly without the surrounding noise of performance that usually accompanied it. She turned. He stood just inside the closed door alone without his guards. He had changed from his formal reception clothing into a plain dark tunic and trousers worn with the easy authority of someone who understood that he did not require ceremony to establish what he was. His pale eyes found her immediately across the length of the hall. The wolf's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Cold blue barely there. He crossed toward her without speaking. His gaze moved from her face to the wolf, and he stopped in front of the dais and looked at it for a long time. She stepped back slightly, giving him room. She had learned over years of managing visiting scholars that people revealed more in their silences than in their questions. His silence was harder to interpret than most. He was not performing reverence. He was not performing indifference either. He was simply looking at the wolf with the same attention she herself gave to things she was genuinely trying to understand. Focused, thorough, without the distortion of preformed conclusion. "It does not melt," he said finally. His voice was lower than it had been in the reception hall. Not softer, more direct, as though the public register he maintained during formal occasions was a layer he had set aside when he came through the door. "No," she said, "it has never melted. In the time it has been here, which the scholars estimate at over a millennium, there is no record of any change in its physical composition. And no one can touch it," he said. "Members of the clan find contact with the surface painful, a burning cold, not dangerous with brief exposure, but unpleasant enough to discourage sustained contact." He was quiet for a moment, still looking at the wolf. "And you," he said, "you are not a member of the clan, not a wolf." "No," she said, "I am human." "Can you touch it?" The pause before she answered was 2 seconds, 1 second longer than she had intended. "Yes," she said, his head turned, slowly, deliberately. He looked at her directly, and she met his gaze with the steadiness she had been cultivating since childhood, because the alternative was to look away, and she did not allow herself that. The wolf's glow strengthened slightly between them. "Show me," he said. She stepped forward and placed her palm flat against the wolf's flank. The cold moved through her in its familiar way, up through the palm, into the wrist, settling into the chest with the steady pulse she had been feeling since morning, the pulse that was different from anything in 2 decades of daily contact. The cold blue light intensified. It moved through the carved body from the eyes downward, through the chest, into the base of the dais. And the inscription became visible again. Every character sharp and bright in the cold light, filling the lower portion of the dais in the old language that perhaps a dozen living people could read. She heard him draw a breath beside her. She kept her hand against the wolf. She kept her eyes on the inscription. "Read it to me," he said. His voice had changed. Not dramatically, not in the way voices changed in stories when people encountered something beyond understanding and became undone, but there was a quality in it now that had not been there before. Something that was not quite uncertainty, but was in its vicinity. The sound of a man who has organized his world around a set of reliable principles and is standing in front of something that does not fit any of them. She read him the inscription. She read it the way she read everything, slowly, with precise attention to each word, without inflection that would suggest interpretation rather than translation. When she finished, the silence in the hall had weight and texture, the kind that follows the delivery of significant information and precedes the response to it. "Blood of the lost line," he said finally. "What lost line?" "I do not know," she said, which was honest as far as it went. "The inscription appeared this morning." Yes, I had never seen it before. In 23 years, the wolf has never exhibited any behavior. No light, no inscription, nothing beyond its physical anomaly. This morning when I made contact, it began. He was quiet again. "No, my mind." She watched him process this with the same systematic attention he had given the wolf, not jumping to conclusion, not performing a reaction, simply taking the information in and working with it. "Isolde Garrick restricted access to this hall," he said. "Specifically this hall. Why would she do that?" "She may have been here recently," Alara said carefully. "She may have seen something she did not want others to see before she had determined what it meant." "The inscription," he said. "Possibly. Yes." He turned to look at the glowing base of the dais again. She watched his pale eyes move across the characters with the focused attention of someone who was taking the words seriously rather than treating them as curiosity. "This says the bond was written before the first alpha drew breath," he said. "That is a claim about the mate bond. The founding bond, the one the old texts describe as the original sacred pairing at the beginning of the pact system. Yes, she said, that is what it appears to reference. He looked at her. The cold blue light moved between them, and his pale eyes in that light looked almost colorless, almost glacial, and she thought with the part of her mind that runs parallel to everything else that he and the wolf shared. Something a quality of ancient contained stillness. The hand that wakes the guardian, he said. That is you. The wolf responded to my touch, she said. It has always responded to my touch. That is all I know with certainty. I said, what do you know with uncertainty? She took a breath. She told him about the morning, the vibration beneath the surface she had never felt before, the warmth that had no logical source, the quality of the glow that felt less like a light switching on and more like something recognizing her. She did not tell him about the feeling that had settled in her chest, the one she had been carefully not examining all day, because that felt too private, and she had survived this long by revealing only what was necessary. He listened with the quality of attention she had only ever experienced from two people in her life. Her father, who had treated everything she said as though it might matter, and the wolf itself, which had always seemed to attend to her presence in a way she could not rationally explain. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. I have been told my entire life that the mate bond is a myth, he said, that the pairing the old texts described was a metaphor for political alliance, a symbolic framework, not a literal supernatural mechanism. Every senior advisor in my council holds this position. She watched him. And you, she said, because his phrasing had been very deliberate about what others believed and had said nothing about what he did. He looked at the wolf again. I am a king, he said. I make decisions based on evidence. A pause. I am standing in front of evidence. He did not stay long after that. He asked her one more question before he left, whether she had told anyone what she had seen that morning. When she said no, he nodded once, as though this confirmed something he had already assumed. He looked at the inscription one final time. Then he crossed the hall to the door with the same quiet economy with which he had entered, and he was gone. The wolf's glow faded slowly after the door closed, the letters retreating back into the ice until the base of the dais looked exactly as it always had, smooth, undifferentiated, ancient. Elara stood in the dark hall for a while longer with her hand still against the wolf's flank. She thought about the dead wolf at the eastern steps. She thought about who would send a scout to the Boreal stronghold the night before the Alpha King arrived, and what that scout had been sent to find, and whether they had found it. She thought about Isolde's footprints near the dais 3 days ago, and the careful restriction of access that followed. She thought about what it meant that the wolf had been silent for a millennium and had chosen this morning, the morning of Calder Draven's arrival, to speak. Then she pressed her palm against the wolf's flank one final time, felt the pulse answer her touch, and went upstairs to sleep. She found him the following afternoon in the east corridor near the garden entrance. She had not been looking for him. She had been walking to the garden to retrieve a bundle of frost herbs that one of the kitchen staff had asked her to collect, a routine task, one of dozens of small services that kept her present in the stronghold's operation without being central to it. He was standing at the corridor window looking out at the snow. What fell now was the dense, quiet kind, each flake deliberate, the whole world muffled and white and unhurried. He had the stillness she had already come to recognize as his thinking posture, the inward-focused attention of someone working through a problem that does not have a clean solution. She stopped. She was not entirely sure why, only that passing felt for the first time in 23 years, like a choice rather than a reflex. She stood beside him at the window and looked out at the snow. Neither of them said anything. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. She generally found silences with people she did not know well to be effortful, requiring management. This one simply existed without requiring anything from either of them. You did not tell anyone about the inscription, he said. He was still looking out the window. No, she said. Why, me? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because I did not yet understand what it meant. And because premature disclosure of incomplete information tends to create more problems than it solves. He was quiet for a moment. That is a very careful way of thinking. Yes, she said. He glanced at her sideways briefly, and she caught the edge of an expression she had not seen on him before. Something that was not quite amusement, but was in its general direction. Isolde's staff have been in the Hall of Relics twice in the past 2 days, he said. I know. I keep an inventory log. Several items were moved. Were they returned? Yes, everything replaced exactly, very carefully. She paused. She is thorough. She is, he agreed. What was she looking for? I believe she was looking for the inscription, Elara said. I believe she has seen it before 3 months ago based on what I now know, and she has been trying to determine whether it was still visible, whether it could be seen by someone who did not already know to look for it. She looked out at the snow. A long silence settled between them. It is not visible when her staff comes, she said. It only appears when I make contact with the wolf. And you have been making contact with the wolf every morning for 23 years, but the inscription only appeared yesterday, the morning of your arrival. She said it because that fact had been sitting in the back of her mind since the beginning, and she had decided it was time to say it out loud and let it be what it was. He was quiet for a long time. The snow outside continued its patient, unhurried falling. Tell me about your father, he said. My adoptive father, she said. Yes, I know he was the archivist. I know he died 4 years ago. Tell me something I do not already know. She thought about Tobias Voss, his careful hands and his precise mind. The way he had looked at her sometimes with an expression she had never been able to fully read, something that was love and grief and a protective apology, all existing in the same moment. He never told me who my parents were, she said. He said he had found me. He said he had been asked to care for me by someone he trusted, and he would not say who. He said in the snow, a night of heavy storm. He said I was wrapped in something he described as cloth that was not quite cloth, smooth and cold and faintly blue. She paused. I always assumed that was the cold in his memory distorting the detail. Now I am less certain. He said nothing, but she felt his attention shift the kind that preceded significant decision-making. He kept notes, she said. He was an archivist. He kept notes on everything. When he died, the clan determined his personal papers had no value and left them to me along with his books. She paused. I read them last night, the sealed portion. He looked at her directly, and she told him. She told him all of it, the Thorn bloodline, the Glacier Keepers, the original guardianship of the wolf, the wax seal she had finally identified. She told him her real name. He repeated it quietly, just to have it in the air between them. Alara Thorn, he said. Then he looked back out at the snow. The conversation was over, and the silence that replaced it was weighted and purposeful and no longer empty. I need to think, he said, one day, and then I need to see the full inscription, whatever the wolf has not yet shown us. She retrieved her frost herbs and returned to the stronghold. She touched the wolf before dawn the following morning. The glow came immediately faster and brighter than before, as though it had been waiting through the hours of the night with the patience of something that understands waiting but is no longer required to do it. The inscription appeared in full, every character sharp and cold and clear. And beneath it, newly visible extending down the far side of the dais base, additional lines that had not been there before. She moved around the dais to read them, crouched in the cold blue light, moved her lips slightly, working through the archaic syntax. When she had parsed the full text completely, she sat back on her heels and looked at it. This portion was different from the first inscription. Less declarative, more direct. It was addressed written not as prophecy but as communication, as though the wolf had been composing this for a specific recipient over a very long time and had finally decided the recipient was ready to receive it. The guardian speaks to the blood of its keeping. You have carried the cold of our covenant your whole life and called it solitude. You have read every record of what came before and never found your own name in the pages because those who loved you were protecting you from the knowledge that comes with it. The time of protection is over. The time of claimings is here. You were never invisible. You were waiting. She read those lines 3 times. The third time her eyes were burning in the way they did when she was holding very still against something that wanted to move. She pressed her forehead lightly against the wolf's flank. Let the cold move through her. Let it be what it was, not an anomaly, not a strangeness, not the unexplained feature of a life that had never quite made sense. An inheritance. A recognition. You were never invisible, she said quietly. The hall was empty. The wolf was listening. You were waiting. The wolf's eyes pulsed once, warm and blue and ancient. Behind her, the door opened. She did not turn immediately. She heard his footsteps cross the threshold, and she knew them, had apparently memorized them without having made any conscious decision to do so. The specific weight and pace of his tread, the controlled deliberateness of each step. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the newest inscription and read it in silence. She waited. When he finished, he looked at her at the position she had just moved from, forehead against the ice, and something moved across his expression. Not performed, not managed, simply present. When did this appear, he said. Now, she said, while I was standing here. The hall was very quiet. The wolf glowed steadily above them. I have been thinking, he said. I finished thinking tonight. He turned to face her fully. I need to ask you something, and I need a direct answer. I give direct answers, she said. I know, he said. A pause. The wolf's glow moved gently between them. Do you feel it, he said. What the inscription describes. The bond. Do you feel anything that corresponds to it? She held his gaze. This was the question she had been sitting with for 2 days managing, examining it from every angle with the patient thoroughness she applied to everything. Yes, she said, since the first night in this room. When you walked through the door and the air changed. He breathed in once slowly. I have felt it since I arrived, he said. I told myself it was strategic attention, the kind of focused assessment I apply to every new situation in person. A pause. That is not what it is. No, she agreed. It is not what it is. The blue light of the wolf moved quietly around the hall. The silence between them was the warm kind that exists when 2 people have both said something true and are giving it the room it requires. He crossed the space between them, stopped close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. She did because looking away would be a kind of dishonesty she did not allow herself. The binding ceremony is in 2 days, he said. Yes. Canceling it will have significant consequences. The Boreal clan needs the alliance. The northern passes are strategically important. He paused. That does not change. No, she said. It does not. So the alliance needs to happen, he said, on different terms than the ones currently scheduled. She was very still. It is the only possibility the inscription supports, he said, with the directness that was his most consistent quality. The bond precedes all other bonds and survives them. I cannot, in a good conscience, commit to an arrangement that contradicts a 1,000-year-old founding law inscribed in the guardian of the very clan I am forming this alliance with. A pause. That would be extremely bad politics. The corners of his mouth moved in the way she had come to recognize as his version of a smile. Small and genuine and entirely unperformed. Extremely bad politics, she agreed, and something that had been held tight in her chest since the morning the wolf first glowed eased. Released, made room. He reached out and touched her jaw with one hand, gently, with the same deliberate intentionality with which he did everything. And she let herself be still under it. Let herself be seen. Let the cold in her hands and the recognition and the years of waiting be exactly what they were without management, without the labor of invisibility. I'm going to speak to Corvin tonight, he said, and to Brecken Garrick in the morning. He dropped his hand. This is going to be complicated. Yes, she said. Are you afraid? She thought about it honestly. Of the complication, no. A pause. Of other things? A little. What things? Of being wrong about large things that cannot be unchosen, she said. He nodded once as though this was exactly the kind of answer he had expected and found sound. I have made large decisions before, he said. He looked at the wolf and the wolf looked back with its pale, glowing eyes. I have never made one with a glacier testifying on its behalf. He looked at her. I trust evidence, and you are the most compelling evidence I have ever encountered. The wolf's glow settled around them, steady and blue and ancient. Outside, the Montana winter continued its work. Inside the Hall of Relics, the ice wolf of the north stood on its dais of black stone, and for the first time in 1,000 years, it did not feel like it was waiting for anything at all. The morning after is always the hardest part. Alara had learned this about significant decisions, not the moment of making them, which carried its own momentum and clarity, but the morning after, when the world had not yet caught up with what you had decided, and you had to carry the weight of it alone in the ordinary light of a regular day, while everything around you continued as though nothing had changed. She woke at her usual hour, dressed in the dark, took her key ring from the wardrobe hook. 14 keys. The same 14 keys they had always been. She stood at her window for a moment and looked out at the northern courtyard. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, and the world outside was the stillness of a landscape that has just been remade. Every surface smoothed and equalized, every sharp edge softened the whole territory, white and patient and waiting to be walked through again. She went to the Hall of Relics. The wolf stood on its dais in the early gray light unchanged, and present its pale eyes carrying the faint residual luminescence of the previous night. She pressed her palm against its flank. The pulse moved through her unchanged, as it had been since the morning everything began. She stood there for a long moment, her hand against the ice, and let herself fully understand what she had agreed to. Not the romance of it. She was not a person given to romance in the sense of softening difficult things with feeling. She was a person who looked at difficult things directly and added up what they cost. What she had agreed to was this. She had told the most powerful man in the Northern Territories that she felt a supernatural bond connecting them based on an inscription in a glacier that no one else could read, and a package of documents left by a dead man who had been keeping her identity secret for 23 years on the instructions of a royal advisor who had never told anyone why. She had done this 2 days before a major political ceremony that the Boreal clan had been preparing for nearly a year. She pressed her forehead against the wolf's flank briefly. You could have given me more time, she said quietly. The wolf's eyes pulsed once. She was fairly certain it was not apologizing. She was documenting the condition of the Third Era goblet cases when she heard the service door. It opened quietly and Alara did not look up from her work. The inventory runs through the 11th hour, she said. If you need something from the storage cabinet, I do not need anything from the storage cabinet. Isolde Garrick closed the service door behind her and stood with her back against it. This was not a passing visit. This was Isolde having made a decision and arriving to execute it, and the fact that she had come through the service door rather than the main entrance told Alara that whatever she intended to say, she had decided it should not be witnessed. Alara set down her documentation cloth and turned to face Isolde fully, because this was not a conversation she was going to manage from a sideways position. Isolde looked for the first time in Alara's experience like a woman carrying weight she had not budgeted for. The composed elegance was still there. It was too deeply built into her to disappear overnight, but beneath it something had shifted. The precise calibration of her expression had loosened slightly, the way a well-maintained mechanism loosens when it has been running under too much pressure for too long. She was still formidable, Ilara had never made the mistake of confusing the loosening of composure with the diminishment of capability. Isolde Garrick was at her most dangerous when she was being honest. "We should talk," Isolde said. "We rarely talk," Ilara said. "We are talking now." Isolde moved into the hall with measured steps and stopped in front of the central dais and looked at the wolf for a long moment without speaking. "I know what you are," Isolde said finally. She did not look away from the wolf. "I have known for 3 months. I found the inscription on a night when I came in here alone checking the hall after a report of unusual cold readings from the temperature monitors on the east wall. The inscription was visible, briefly faintly, as though it was deciding whether to commit to being seen." She paused. "I read it. I had it translated. And then I spent 3 months determining what it meant and what to do about it." She turned then and looked at Ilara with the amber eyes that Ilara had been reading for 23 years. "I am not asking you to deny it," Isolde said. "I am not going to pretend the inscription does not exist, or that the Thorn claim is not legally significant under a very old reading of founding law. I have done enough research to know that pretending will not hold." A pause. "What I am asking you to understand is the scale of what you are asking the world to accommodate." Ilara said nothing. She was listening. "The alliance with Calder Draven is not incidental," Isolde said. "The Northern Territories have been in unstable consolidation for 5 years. The trade routes through the Rocky Mountain passes are contested by 3 separate clan coalitions, and the disputes have been escalating. An alliance between the Boreal clan and the Alpha King creates a stabilizing center that every Northern clan has been waiting for." Her voice was very precise. "This ceremony is not about my future. It is about what happens to 30,000 wolves over the next decade." She stopped. She let that settle. "You have no pack," she said then. "You have no clan, no political infrastructure, no military capacity. You have an ancient bloodline claim a glacier inscription and a dead man's papers. Against that, I have a living alliance and a real architecture for regional stability." She looked at Ilara steadily. "What exactly do you believe you can offer him that is worth dismantling all of that?" The question was not contemptuous. That was what made it so difficult. It was a genuine political argument delivered by someone who had thought about it carefully and believed it. Ilara looked at Isolde for a long moment. She thought about 2 decades of invisibility and the specific kind of wisdom it produced, the understanding of how power actually worked beneath the performances people built around it, the difference between structures that held because of their genuine weight and structures that held because no one had yet applied the right kind of pressure to the right point. She thought about what Isolde was offering, which was in its own way a real thing, a real future for real people. She was not wrong about the stakes. And she thought about the wolf, about what it had been building toward line by line, day by day, as though it understood that what it was delivering was too large to receive all at once and that the recipient needed time to grow into it. "The truth," Ilara said. "I can offer him the truth." Isolde looked at her. "The truth does not stabilize trade routes," she said with the flatness of someone who has considered that option and found it insufficient. "No," Ilara agreed, "but it is the only thing that can be built on." A long silence. Isolde looked at her with something in her eyes that was not anger and not contempt and was underneath all the controlled elegance and 3 months of careful management, simply tired. The exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a difficult truth alone for too long. She turned and walked to the service door, her hand on the frame. A pause. "My father does not know the full extent of it," she said without turning around. "He knows about the inscription. He does not know about the Thorn Covenant documents or what they legally imply for the trade route oversight." Another pause. "He will not take it well." Then she was gone. Ilara stood in the quiet hall and listened to the service door close. Isolde had just in her own way stepped back. Not all the way, not with warmth or generosity or anything that resembled surrender. But she had stepped back, and for Isolde Garrick, that was its own kind of answer. Elder Corvin found her at the morning meal. He sat across from her without asking, carrying a worn leather document folder. "He spoke to me last night," Corvin said, "after he left you in the hall. I assumed he would. He is going to speak to Brecken Garrick this morning." A pause. "I want to make sure you are prepared for what that conversation will set in motion." She looked at him. "Tell me." "Brecken is not going to respond well initially," Corvin said. "He is a pragmatic man, and pragmatic men dislike having the ground shift under arrangements they have committed to publicly. He will argue. He will suggest that the inscription is ambiguous, that the Thorn claim is historically interesting, but legally dormant, and that the most reasonable course is to proceed with the ceremony and address the bloodline question through formal channels at a later date." He looked at her steadily. "Calder will not agree to this, but you should be prepared for the argument to be made." "I have heard worse arguments," she said. Something shifted in Corvin's expression, the closest thing to warmth she had seen from him. "I imagine you have." He pushed the document folder across the table toward her. "These are additional records I have been keeping for 30 years. The legal precedents from the original charter that address what happens when a bloodline claim intersects with a standing political arrangement. The full documentation of what actually occurred during the Boreal clan's occupation of this stronghold 3 generations ago. She did not touch the folder yet. You have been keeping these for 30 years. Since the night Tobias came to me, Corvin said simply. He came to me with a child he needed to hide and a problem he did not know how to solve. I helped him with the hiding. The solving I have been preparing for ever since. He paused. The information inside is not comfortable reading. The official historical record describes the transition as peaceful absorption. The actual documents describe something considerably different. Alara picked up the folder and felt the weight of 30 years of patient preparation. And Alara, the trade route question is not a small thing. Whatever happens in that room this morning, the 5 Alpha Council will not accept it quietly. They have too much at stake, Barso. She looked up at him. How much do they know? She said. Enough, he said. The scout they sent 2 nights ago confirmed that the wolf was active. They will have received that report by now. He looked at her with his old gold eyes steady and direct. Prepare accordingly. He left. She sat at the table with the folder in her hands and her tea going cold, and the specific clarity of someone who has just understood that what they thought was a complicated personal situation is also, and has been all along, a matter of significant consequence for people and territories far beyond the walls of one stronghold in the Montana mountains. She opened the folder and began to read. She was in the lower archive when she heard it. Muffled through 2 sets of stone walls and the length of the corridor between the archive room and the council chamber, but unmistakable the acoustic signature of a meeting that had stopped being measured. One voice raised, then controlled, then raised again. Brecken Garrick's voice going through the exact sequence Corvin had predicted. She continued reading. She had 3 sections of the Thorn Covenant documents left to work through, and she needed to understand them completely before she could be useful to anyone. The documents were, as Corvin had indicated, not comfortable reading. The Boreal clan's occupation of this stronghold 3 generations past had not been the negotiated transition the historical record described. The Thorn family had not dissolved peacefully into the general population. There had been a systematic effort to eliminate the Glacier Keeper line, driven not by the Boreal clan itself, which had been a smaller and less organized entity at the time, but by the predecessor organization of what was now the 5 Alpha Council of the Northern Territory. The trade route control the council currently held had been established specifically by removing the family that the Founding Covenant had assigned to oversee it. They had known 3 generations ago what the Thorn Guardianship Covenant meant for their control of the passes. They had acted accordingly. And now they knew that the last Thorn was alive had been living for 23 years inside the stronghold, where the Founding Covenant was recorded in a glacier that had been waiting specifically for her to claim it. She gathered the documents, organized them in order of legal significance, and went upstairs to find Calder Draven. She knocked on the door of the southern study at the hour between the morning meeting and the midday meal. "Come in," he said without asking who it was. She entered and found him at the desk, with maps spread to one side, trade route documentation overlaid with territorial boundaries, the kind of comprehensive strategic picture that she recognized as preparation for a specific kind of conversation. He looked up. His expression moved through several things, quickly relief, she thought, and something more complicated, and settled into the focused attention that was his default mode when something required his full capacity. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Brecken Garrick has agreed to postpone the binding ceremony pending review of the Founding Covenant documents," he said. "He is not happy. He is processing it with the particular anger of a man who has realized he was not in possession of the full picture of his own stronghold's history, and that several people around him knew this for a considerable time without informing him." "Isolde," she said. "Isolde," he confirmed. "That conversation will happen separately and is not our primary concern today." He looked at her steadily. "The 5 Alpha Council sent a formal communication this morning. They are requesting an expedited confirmation of the binding ceremony and explicitly requesting that all discussions of Founding Covenant provisions be deferred to a future council session, one they would chair." Alara was quiet for a moment. "They move quickly. They move very quickly," he said, "which tells me that whatever their scout confirmed 2 nights ago was significant enough to trigger an immediate political response." He paused. "What did you find in Corvin's documents?" She told him. She told him the full history. The Thorn family, the transition, the deliberate elimination of the Glacier Keeper line by the predecessor organization of the 5 Alpha Council. She told him about the trade route oversight provision in the Founding Covenant, what it meant legally, and what it meant in terms of the 15 years of unauthorized extraction the Council had been conducting since they consolidated the pass controls. $40 million conservatively, flowing through routes that under founding law should have been overseen by the Thorn line. She told him all of it clearly and in order of legal significance, the way she organized archival information, most critical first, supporting detail following implications last. He listened without interrupting. His hands were flat on the desk, his pale eyes steady on her face, and he listened to everything with the quality of attention that she had come to understand was not just professional habit, but something more fundamental, a genuine conviction that information deserved to be heard completely before it was acted upon. When she finished, the silence was the kind that precedes a significant decision. The council's communication this morning was not a request, he said finally. It was a preemptive legal maneuver. If they can get confirmation of a binding ceremony on record before the founding covenant provisions are formally recognized, they create a political baseline that makes the covenant claim harder to act on. He was quiet for a moment. They have done this before. 3 generations ago, they moved before the Thorne family could formally register an objection to the stronghold transition. Yes, she said, that is exactly what the documents show. He stood. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind him, looking out at the stronghold courtyard where the morning's foot traffic had turned the fresh snow gray impractical. I need 2 things from you, he said. I need you to be present for what comes next, not as a witness, as a participant. He turned from the window. The founding covenant requires the Glacier Keeper to make the claim formally. Corvin's documents are supporting evidence. The inscription is testimony. But the claim has to come from you. She looked at him. In front of whom, she said. Everyone, he said. The council will not be defeated quietly or privately. If we address this in closed rooms, they will reframe it, delay it, and ultimately bury it the same way they buried the Thorne line 3 generations ago. His pale eyes were steady on her face. This has to happen publicly. In front of every clan leader in the Northern Territory with full documentation, with the inscription as evidence, and with you standing at the center of it and speaking in your own voice. The quiet that followed was the kind that lives inside a decision that has not yet been made, but is very close to being made. She could feel the weight of it, not the fear of it, because she had examined the fear already and knew its dimensions, but the actual weight of what it required. Standing in the center of a room full of wolves who had spent 23 years looking past her, speaking in a voice she had spent 23 years making small. When she said, tomorrow morning, he said, before the council can consolidate their position further. She was still for a moment. Then she thought about the wolf's words. You were never invisible. You were waiting. She thought about her father's handwriting in the last page of the sealed documents, the care in every stroke. She thought about what she had told Isolde that morning. The truth is the only thing that can be built on. All right, she said. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her and reached out and took her hand. Not the gentle touch on the jaw from the previous night, but both hands around hers, firm and deliberate, the grip of someone making a commitment rather than offering comfort. Her hands were cold as they always were. He felt it and looked down at them and then up at her face, and the expression he wore was the open, unmanaged one, the face he showed when he was not performing anything for anyone. You have been doing the hard work alone for 23 years, he said. Tomorrow you do not do it alone. She looked at their hands, his warm around her cold. The familiar deep chill in her palms, which she had spent her whole life treating as a strangeness, and which she now understood was simply what it felt like to carry something ancient and waiting to be used. I know, she said. Outside the study window, the Montana sky was low and gray, and full of the patience of a winter that is not finished with what it has to say. Inside the Hall of Relics at the other end of the stronghold, the Ice Wolf of the North stood on its dais in the quiet afternoon light, its pale eyes holding their faint residual glow, waiting for the morning with the certainty of something that has never in 1,000 years been wrong about what was coming. Ren Garrett came to her that evening. He was not the kind of man who announced himself. He simply appeared at the entrance to the lower archive where she was working and stood in the doorway with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to say something and has finally run out of reasons to keep waiting. Alar had always had a careful regard for Ren. He was quieter than his sister, less polished, less interested in the performance that Isolde had elevated to an art form. He watched things. He remembered what he watched. She had recognized these qualities years ago because they were the same qualities she had developed herself, and people with the same survival tools recognized each other. I have something you need to see, he said. He set a thin leather pouch on the table in front of her. Inside were folded papers, correspondence she could see in Isolde's handwriting, dated across a span of 6 weeks. When Alara said which was the most important question. She made first contact with the council 6 weeks before their scout arrived here, Ren said. I found these 3 days ago in the lining of a courier bag that was returned by mistake to our family's storeroom instead of the dispatch office. He paused. I have been deciding what to do with them since then. Alara opened the first letter and read it. Then she read the second. By the time she reached the fourth, she understood the full shape of what Isolde had done. The letters were careful. Isolde was always careful, but the outline was clear. 6 weeks ago, when Isolde had first found the inscription and had it translated, she had contacted the 5 Alpha Council directly. Not to report the Thorne claim, to negotiate her own position within whatever arrangement would follow. Isolde had not been managing the information to protect the Alliance. She had been managing it to ensure that when the Alliance changed shape, which she had understood, it inevitably she would be on the right side of it. She was covering herself, Alara said. Yes, Ren said. Both possibilities. If the Council succeeded in burying the Thorne claim, Isolde had their loyalty for having managed the information. If the claim succeeded, he paused. She was building a position there too. I am not entirely certain what she offered them. Alara looked at the letters. She thought about Isolde stepping back that morning in the hall. She thought about the tiredness in Isolde's amber eyes. Isolde had not stepped back because she was convinced. She had stepped back because she had calculated that the position was no longer defensible and had already begun moving to the next one. These need to go to Calder Draven tonight, Alara said. I know, Ren said. That is why I brought them to you. She looked at him. Why not take them directly? He looked at her steadily. Because you are the one who knows what they mean in context. And because I have watched you work in this stronghold for 23 years. And I know that when you take something to someone, it has already been understood completely. A pause. I trust your judgment with this more than I trusted my own. Alara was quiet for a moment. She had spent 23 years being overlooked in this stronghold. She had not spent them being unknown to everyone. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. Wait until tomorrow is over. She brought the letters to Calder that night. He read them in the silence she had learned to wait through the focused, comprehensive silence that meant information was being processed in full rather than reacted to in part. When he finished, he set them on the desk and looked at them for a long moment. This changes the shape of tomorrow, he said. Yes, she said. The council has been anticipating this. They have been in communication with Isolde for 6 weeks. They know more about the founding covenant situation than we thought they did. They know more, he said, but they do not have the documents. They do not have the inscription. And they do not have you. He looked at her. Tomorrow morning, we present everything at once. The history, the covenant documents, the inscription, Ren's testimony, and the financial records of what the council has been extracting from those routes. He paused. I have asked the Alliance Oversight Body to send a representative. They will arrive at dawn. Alara looked at him. You contacted the Alliance. Yesterday after our conversation in the corridor, he said. I had already decided that whatever was happening in this stronghold was significant enough to warrant independent oversight. After reading Corbin's documents, I was certain. He met her eyes. No matter what the Council attempts tomorrow, the Alliance's presence means the proceedings cannot be dismissed or deferred. Whatever is decided will be decided on the record in front of a body that has authority over all the northern clans, including the Council itself. She was quiet for a moment, taking in the full scope of what he had prepared. You planned this before I told you about Ren's letters, she said. I planned for multiple contingencies, he said simply. This is what it looks like when someone has been doing the work. And she thought, looking at him across the desk in the lamplight of the southern study, that this was perhaps the thing she found most remarkable about him. Not the authority, which was simply a fact of what he was. Not the physical presence, which was undeniable, but not what she had found herself thinking about in unguarded moments. It was the work. The patient, thorough, unglamorous work of preparing for things before they became crises. She recognized it because she had been doing the same thing alone for 23 years. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow will require everything you have. I know, she said. She rose to leave. At the door, she stopped and turned back. Calder, she said. It was the first time she had used his name directly without the title. He looked at her. Thank you, she said, for taking the evidence seriously. He was quiet for a moment. Then, thank you for being evidence worth taking seriously. The corners of his mouth moved in the way she had come to know. She left before she lost the steadiness she needed to carry into tomorrow. The Great Hall of the Boreal Stronghold had not held this many clan leaders since the peace assembly 5 years ago, following the northern territorial conflicts. Alara stood in the corridor outside and listened to the sound of it, the low layered noise of 40 wolves in a large stone room, the particular frequency of a gathering that understood something significant was about to happen and had not yet decided how to feel about it. She had been in this corridor many times. She had carried trays through it. She had moved along its edges with the particular invisibility she had cultivated for 2 decades. She had been a background presence in this stronghold for her entire life, the unremarkable human woman who kept the Relics Hall in order and could be counted on not to make scenes. She was about to walk through the door at the center of it. Corvin appeared beside her. The Alliance representative is seated, he said quietly. The Council has 5 members present. Their lead advocate has already submitted a procedural objection to the inclusion of the founding covenant documents as evidence, which the Alliance representative has already overruled. They move fast, she said. They are frightened, Corvin said. Frightened people move fast and make mistakes. He looked at her with his old gold eyes. Are you ready? She thought about the question honestly. She thought about what it meant to walk into a room full of wolves who had spent 23 years looking past her and speak in a voice she had spent 23 years making small. She thought about the inscription, "You were never invisible. You were waiting," and about her father writing her real name at the end of 30 years of hidden notes with the forward lean of his script that only appeared when he was writing something that mattered to him. She thought about what she had told Isolde. The truth is the only thing that can be built on. Yes, she said, I am ready. She walked through the door. The room reorganized itself when she entered. Not dramatically, not in the theatrical way that rooms reorganize themselves when powerful figures entered. It was subtler than that, the particular recalibration that happens when people who have categorized someone one way are suddenly required to look at them differently. She could feel it as she crossed the floor, eyes adjusting assessments, revising the slow, uncomfortable work of seeing something clearly that had been overlooked. She walked to the center of the room. She stood there, not to the side, not near the door. At the center where the light from the high windows fell directly where everyone in the room could see her without turning their heads. Calder was already standing at the front of the assembly beside a long table covered in documents. Corvin took his position to her left. Ren Garrick stood against the wall near the entrance, his arms folded, his expression, the steady, quiet one she had always associated with him, the look of a man who has decided something and is committed to it. The Alliance representative, a gray-haired woman named Elder Marin, whose authority in the Northern Territories was second only to the founding council itself, sat at the head of the assembly table and looked at Alara with the focused attention of someone who had been told something significant was about to happen and was reserving judgment until she had seen it herself. The 5 Alpha Council sat in a cluster near the east wall, 4 of the 5 present, their 5th member notably absent. They looked collectively like men who had been prepared for a negotiation and had arrived to find something different. Their lead advocate, a heavy-set wolf named Farron, was already leaning toward his neighbor and speaking quietly behind his hand. Alara looked at none of them in particular. She looked at the room as a whole, the way she had been trained by 2 decades of watching rooms from their edges. Calder spoke first. He spoke with the clarity that was his most consistent quality, not performing persuasion, not building to dramatic effect, simply presenting information in the order and weight that the information warranted. He laid out the founding covenant's provisions regarding the Glacier Keeper oversight of the northern passes. He presented the timeline of the Thorn family's displacement 3 generations ago and the predecessor organization that had engineered it. He quantified with the precision Corvin's documents allowed the 15 years of unauthorized trade extraction, $43 million distributed across 7 revenue streams documented in the financial records that had been obtained through the council member who had chosen in the past week to provide them. The council's advocate objected twice. The Alliance representative overruled him twice with the particular brevity of someone who has heard the objection before and found it without merit. Then Calder stepped back. The founding covenant requires the Glacier Keeper to make the formal claim in her own voice, he said. Alara Thorn. She heard her name, her real name, spoken aloud in this room for the first time. She stepped forward. She had thought about what she would say. She had prepared it the way she prepared everything methodically, with attention to what was necessary and what was surplus. She had decided in the end to say very little. The document said what needed to be said about history and law. The inscription said what needed to be said about covenant and blood. What she needed to say was simpler. I am Alara Thorn, she said. Her voice was even, not loud. Loud was not necessary in a stone room full of wolves who were paying close attention. I am the last surviving member of the Thorn bloodline, the Glacier Keepers. I have lived in this stronghold for 23 years as its archivist's daughter, and for the past 4 years as its keeper of relics. I have touched the Ice Wolf of the North every morning for 23 years, without burns, without pain, as is the right of the Thorn line under the founding covenant that is documented in the records you have been given. She paused. The room was very quiet. I am not here to claim territory, she said. I am not here to dismantle the alliance the Boreal clan has been building in. An alliance founded on complete information and genuine consent is a stronger alliance than one built on managed silence. What I am here to do is say in my own voice in front of every clan leader in this territory and in front of the alliance oversight body, the founding covenant exists. The Thorn line exists. And what the Glacier remembers, no political arrangement can undo. She stepped back. The room exhaled. Then Ren Garrick stepped forward from his position against the wall and presented his testimony about the letters Isolde's 6 weeks of correspondence with the council, the negotiated positions that managed silence. He presented them factually without embellishment, with the same quiet thoroughness that had always been his most consistent quality. The council's advocate attempted 3 more objections. The alliance representative overruled all 3. Then Elder Marin rose. She was the kind of woman whose authority needed no announcement. It was simply present in the way she occupied space, in the particular quality of silence she produced when she began to speak. She addressed the assembly for 12 minutes. She addressed the history, the legal provisions, the documented financial extraction, and the procedural record of the council's communications with Isolde Garrick. Then she addressed the council directly. The evidence presented today establishes a pattern of coordinated suppression of founding covenant provisions for economic benefit conducted over a period of 15 years in willful disregard of the legal framework that governs all Northern Clan operations under Alliance oversight. She paused. This constitutes a material violation of Alliance charter provisions. The individuals who directed this activity, and I am speaking specifically of the 4 senior members of the 5 Alpha Council currently present, are hereby formally charged. The room changed when she said it, not loudly. It was a slow, settling change, the kind that happens when a truth that has been present for a long time is finally said out loud in the right place by the right person with the right authority. Farron, the council's advocate, attempted to speak. Elder Marin looked at him once. He sat back down. The formal proceedings will be conducted by the Alliance Tribunal over the following 30 days, Marin said. In the interim, the council's authority over the Northern Pass trade routes is suspended pending investigation. Oversight reverts to the provisions of the founding covenant under the guidance of the Thorn Line. She looked at Alara. The covenant stands, she said simply. Brecken Garrick found Alara in the corridor outside afterward. He looked at her the way he had looked at the wolf that morning in the hall, with the expression of a man renegotiating his relationship with something he thought he had understood. My daughter, he said, then stopped. Then she knew about this. Yes, Alara said. She found the inscription 3 months ago. He was quiet for a long moment. The sounds from the great hall filtered through the closed doors, the movement of 40 people absorbing information that would take time to fully settle. You were in my stronghold for 23 years, he said. Yes, she said. And I never, he stopped again, looked at the floor, then at her. My archivist kept this from me. He kept it from everyone, she said, to protect me. He thought it was the right thing at the time. He made the choice. He was probably right. Brecken looked at her for a long moment. She waited. The Alliance, he said finally. It is still possible. Yes, she said. Calder has said so, on accurate terms with complete information. It will be stronger for it. He made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite acknowledgement. Then he walked away down the corridor with the deliberate step of a man who has significant work ahead of him and has already begun to think about how to do it. She watched him go. Then she turned and found Calder standing a few feet away, where he had apparently been for the past several minutes, giving Brecken the space to say what he needed to say. He looked at her with the open expression, the one that appeared when he was not managing anything for anyone. It is done, he said. The tribunal still has 30 days, she said. Yes, he agreed. But the evidence is complete. The Alliance representative has what she needs. What happens in those 30 days is legal process, not uncertainty. He paused. The outcome is not in doubt. She looked at him. How are you so certain? Because I read every document in that folder, he said, twice, and because I trust the evidence. A beat, including the evidence standing in front of me. She had heard him say it before. She would hear him say it again. Each time she noticed it landed differently, not lighter as repetition usually made things, but with increasing weight, as though the phrase was still in the process of becoming fully true, and each repetition was another layer of its setting. Come with me, she said. They went to the Hall of Relics. It was late afternoon and the hall was empty, the light from the high windows thin and golden, and angled low in the way that only happened in the last hour before dusk in Montana winter. The wolf stood on its dais at the center of the room, exactly as it always stood. Exactly as it had always stood, unchanged, patient, present. Alara crossed to it without hesitation and placed her palm flat against its flank. The glow came, not gradually this time, not building up from nothing. It was immediate and full and warm, the cold blue light filling the carved body from the dais, upward through the chest and into the pale carved eyes, until the wolf stood in its own light in the quiet hall, and the inscription at the base of the dais was sharp and clear, and the new lines, all of them, every line the wolf had been adding across the past 3 days, were visible in their entirety. Calder came to stand beside her. He read them. She watched him read them, watched his pale eyes move across the characters she had memorized by now, watched him reach the final lines. You were never invisible. You were waiting. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed his hand against the wolf's flank beside hers. The cold did not burn him. It moved through his hand the way it moved through hers steadily, with the quality of a greeting rather than a refusal. The glow intensified slightly, warmth spreading through the wolf's carved body in the cold blue light. Not threatening, not burning, simply present. He looked at his hand, then at her. It does not burn, he said. No, she said. It does not. The wolf's pale eyes pulsed once slow and warm, and the light in the hall settled into a steady, even glow that had nothing restless about it, the light of something that has been waiting for a very long time and has arrived at last at the thing it was waiting for. Calder looked at the inscription one more time, then he looked at her. The recognition ceremony, he said. Corvin has the founding law text. The provisions are clear. It requires the Hall the Guardian and both parties freely choosing. He paused. Whenever you are ready. She pressed her palm against the wolf's flank and felt the pulse answer her touch, the same pulse she had felt every morning for 23 years, steady and familiar and entirely hers, which she now understood had always been entirely hers. I have been ready for a long time, she said. I simply did not know it. The recognition ceremony was small. Witnessed by Elder Corvin, who stood with the stillness of a man fulfilling a purpose 30 years in the making. Witnessed by Brecken Garrick, who stood with the expression of a man renegotiating his relationship with his own history. Witnessed by Ren Garrick, who stood near the entrance with the open, uncomplicated expression of someone who has suspected for years that something was not as it appeared and is relieved to be proven right. Witnessed by Elder Marin of the Alliance, who had asked quietly if she might attend and had been told yes. and witnessed by the wolf which stood on its dais in its cold ancient light and had been, Alara understood, waiting for this moment with the patient certainty of glacier ice by simply remaining exactly what it was through every storm and season until the world was finally ready to see it clearly. Calder stood in front of her and took both her hands in his. Her hands were cold, as they always were. He felt it and looked down at them and then up at her face, and something moved across his expression that was the opposite of composed, open, and warm, and entirely unmanaged. This was what he looked like when he was not performing anything for anyone. Freely given, Corvin said from somewhere behind them. Freely given, she said. Calder's hands tightened on hers, not a grip, but a holding. The specific quality of someone making a choice rather than being carried by circumstance. Then he spoke the words that Corvin had found in the founding law text in the old language, the original language of the Pact system before the common tongue had standardized it. Ilara listened to them and felt them settle into her chest alongside the wolf's pulse and the cold that had lived in her hands for as long as she could remember. She spoke the response when it was time, in the same old language reading from the page Corvin held for her. And then halfway through, no longer needing the page because the words were familiar, in the way her own name and her father's handwriting was familiar, something recognized rather than newly learned. The wolf's glow intensified when the last words were spoken. It filled the hall with cold blue, light bright as winter noon in a snowfield, and then faded slowly back to its usual subtle pulse. The wolf stood on his dais in the quiet hall exactly as it always had. Unchanged, patient, present. But something in the quality of its stillness was different now. Something had settled in it that had not been settled before. The waiting was over. And without the waiting, what remained was simply what the wolf had always been, the guardian of the covenant, doing exactly what it had been made to do. The ice was still cold in August. This surprised visitors who expected Montana summers to reach even the lowest chambers of the cave system beneath the stronghold. But the geology of the place was old and specific, ancient limestone and granite, laid down in the compression of mountain formation, insulated from seasonal temperature change by hundreds of feet of dense rock. And the caves beneath the boreal stronghold remained at their winter temperature year-round. Alara had known this for years. She had mapped every chamber and passage of the cave system over the course of a decade, following routes she had thought were curiosity and understood now were memory. She had known the temperature without thinking about it, the way you know the temperature of your own hands. She moved through the lower passage now, with a lantern in one hand and a notebook in the other, conducting the third assessment of the month for the Alliance Oversight Committee that had been established following the tribunal proceedings. The work was detailed and exacting, and she found it deeply satisfying, the kind of work that required the full application of knowledge and attention and produced something concrete and useful at the end of it. The 5 Alpha Council's formal tribunal had concluded 6 weeks ago. 4 senior members had been removed from their positions and barred permanently from holding Alliance-recognized clan authority. The 5th, who had provided the financial documentation, had been assessed separately and given a reduced sanction with conditions. The financial records of 15 years of unauthorized trade extraction had been entered into the Alliance's permanent record. Restitution proceedings had begun. Farron, the Council's advocate, had attempted 3 procedural appeals. The Alliance Tribunal had denied all 3. The Northern Pass trade routes had been placed under a joint oversight structure, a committee that included Alliance representation clan leadership from the 3 major territorial coalitions, and as the founding covenant specified, the Thorn Line. Alara chaired the committee's documentation subgroup and had submitted 2 reports so far that the Alliance representative had described in correspondence. Corvin had shown her with barely concealed satisfaction as the most thorough analysis of Northern Territorial resource management the oversight body had received in 30 years of operation. She made a note in her notebook, recorded the temperature reading for the 3rd chamber, and moved on. Above her in the stronghold, things had changed. Not everything. The Hall of Relics was still the Hall of Relics, still required the same methodical morning inventory, still housed the same ceremonial goblets and treaty scrolls and woven battle banners that had always been there. The wolf still stood on its dais. She still touched it every morning. But the smallness was gone. The specific quality of smallness she had maintained for 23 years, the habit of making herself unremarkable, the constant low-level labor of managing the expectation that she would be overlooked. It was gone. Not because anything external had changed overnight, but because the thing that had been waiting in her had finally been given room to be what it was. She was Alara Thorn. The cold in her veins was not a deficit or a strangeness, but an inheritance, and she had carried it for 23 years without knowing its name. And now she knew its name and it fit. Isolde Garrick was still at the stronghold. This had been Brecken Garrick's decision, made in the long, difficult conversations between father and daughter that Alara had not been present for and had not sought to know the details of. Isolde had not been charged. The Alliance Tribunal had determined that her communications with the Council, while ethically compromised, had not risen to the level of a charter violation. She had lost her position as her father's primary political representative. She had lost the alliance negotiations she had spent a year building toward. She had lost, most significantly, the trust she had worked for most of her adult life to establish. She had not, as far as Alara could observe, lost herself. She was directing her considerable intelligence and organizational capability toward the restitution proceedings, which required exactly the kind of careful management of complex multi-party documentation that she was, by any honest assessment, very good at. She had not spoken to Alara directly since the morning in the Hall of Relics. She had not been unkind in the indirect ways available to her. She was, it seemed, operating under the particular discipline of a woman who has been wrong about something significant and has decided to address it through action rather than apology. Alara found she could respect that even without warmth. Wren had been appointed to the Joint Oversight Committee's security subgroup, which had required him to develop a formal working relationship with Calder's security advisors that was, from what Alara had observed, developing into something that looked increasingly like mutual respect. He had told her in the direct way that was his most consistent quality, that he was glad he had brought the letters to her rather than sitting on them. She had told him she was glad too. She completed the cave assessment at the third hour, made her final notation, and climbed back up through the connecting passage to the stronghold's lower level. She crossed to the Hall of Relics as she always did in the morning, and unlocked the main door and entered and stood for a moment in the familiar silence. The artifacts rested in their places. She checked them the way she checked everything systematically, left to right, near to far. The ceremonial goblets, the treaty scrolls, the battle banners, the blade collection, the founding-era council seals, which had a new companion piece, now a reproduction of the Thorn Guardianship Covenant, displayed in a case of its own, the original safely preserved in Alliance archival storage. All present, all undisturbed. She crossed to the wolf. She pressed her palm flat against its flank. The cold moved through her in its familiar way, up through the palm and into the wrist, and settling into her chest with the pulse she had been feeling every morning for 23 years and now understood. The glow came as it always did, soft and steady and present. The inscription visible at the base of the dais, every character clear. What the glacier remembers, no crown can undo. She read the last line as she always did. Behind her, the door opened. She did not turn immediately. She heard his footsteps cross the threshold. She had memorized them without making any conscious decision to do so months ago now, and the memorization had only deepened, and listened to the particular weight and pace of them cross the stone floor of the hall. He came to stand beside her. He placed his hand against the wolf's flank beside hers, as he had taken to doing in the mornings when he was in the stronghold, which was more often now than his initial schedule had suggested he would be. The cold did not burn him. It had not burned him since the morning in the hall when the ceremony was done, and the wolf had decided with the absolute authority of 1,000 years of judgment that he was where he was supposed to be. The glow settled around both their hands, warm and blue and even. They stood like that for a moment in the quiet hall before the rest of the stronghold woke and filled with the ordinary business of an ordinary morning. The Oversight Committee report is due to the Alliance by the 15th, she said. I know, he said. I read the draft. It is thorough. It needs to be thorough, she said. The Northern Pass Restitution Agreement has 17 separate financial instruments that all need to be accounted for individually. If even one is mischaracterized, the Council's advocates will use it to challenge the entire framework. I am aware, he said. There was something in his voice that was not quite amusement, but was in its general direction. She had learned to hear it. You have been aware of this for 3 weeks. You have also explained it to me twice. A third time seemed unnecessary, she said. Extremely unnecessary, he agreed. The wolf's eyes pulsed once warm and slow. The cold blue light moved quietly around the hall, filling the corners, touching the artifacts in their cases, settling over everything, in the particular way it settled when it was content, when the Guardian had done its work and the work was good and there was nothing left to wait for. Alara stood with her palm against the wolf's flank and felt the pulse that had been in her hands her entire life, and thought about everything it had taken to arrive at this particular ordinary morning. The 23 years, the storm, the inscription appearing in the dark. A man who trusted evidence, standing in front of evidence he had not expected, and choosing to trust it anyway. A sealed package opened at last by someone finally ready to receive what was inside. She thought about her father writing her name at the end of 30 years of hidden notes with the forward lean of his script that only appeared when he was writing something that mattered to him. She thought about the wolf's words. You were never invisible. You were waiting. Ready, Calder said. She took her hand from the wolf's flank. The glow faded slowly, the letters retreating back into the ice, the wolf settling into its dais with the absolute stillness of something that has nowhere left to go. Yes, she said. Outside, the Montana summer was bright and warm and already busy with the complicated business of the world. Inside the Hall of Relics, the Ice Wolf of the North stood on its dais of black stone in the morning quiet, unchanged and patient and present, its pale eyes holding the faint residual light of a guardian whose long work is complete. It had held the Covenant through 1,000 years of change, through the transitions of power and the reshaping of clans and the slow erosion of the old language from daily use. It had waited with the patience of glacier ice for the hand that would wake it and the king who would hear it, and the moment when the world was finally ready to hold the truth it carried. It had found them in the end, not through catastrophe or drama, but through the slow accumulation of ordinary mornings. A woman with cold hands pressing her palm to ancient ice and feeling recognized. A man who trusted evidence, learning to trust something older than evidence. A 30-year secret finally given room to breathe. This is how the oldest bonds survive. Not through ceremony alone, but through the patient accumulated choosing day by day to remain exactly what you are until the world sees it clearly. The wolf had always known this. It had simply been waiting for Alara to know it too.